So I'm going to go through all these things. I'm going to talk a little bit about career paths, very little about choosing your path, but a little bit about that, then getting there, and then I'm not actually going to do an intro to cover letters other than saying some words, but I'm going to, and I'm not going to actually go over interviews either other than saying some words, but I will go through a little bit of CVs. CVs are really important, and you guys should be working on your CVs now. So all faculty members, we'll come back to this again a little bit. All faculty members basically have a running CV from the time you're a graduate student. And so the CV just grows. And then what you do is you tailor it to specific things. So my CV right now is, I don't know, 70 pages long or 80 pages long or something like that. So that's the CV part that we're going to talk about, and then the publications. And so that's what it is. And then when I need a CV for something in particular, like I'm putting in a grant proposal, or a news station says send me a CV, I don't send them the 80-page CV. Instead, I chop it down, I tailor it to whatever it is that I'm aiming at. All right. So you guys know this, but I'm going to say it again. You can ask me about absolutely anything, all right? So I'm not going to give you my bio in particular, other than to say, so I got my undergraduate degrees in physics and math, but almost also in geology and political science, because I was interested in those things, and I think that as an undergrad, what you should do is explore as many things as you can that you're interested in. Then my wife and I got married and went to the Peace Corps and were teachers in the Peace Corps for 2 years, and after that came back and went to graduate school in Wisconsin, and I got my PhD in physics and a PhD, effectively minor, in mathematics there also. Then I was a Wigner Fellow which is the lab fellow at Oak Ridge National Lab, and then I was a research scientist, senior research scientist at Oak Ridge National Lab, and then I came up here. So, that said, that's kind of sounds like a nice straight path, but it wasn't at all a straight path. I've done lots of jobs. I mean, I really have done lots of jobs. I sold cameras, I worked in a boiler room for a while. A boiler room is where the really obnoxious people who make telephone calls and say, hi, can we convince you to buy whatever it is they want to convince you to buy. So I worked in a boiler room for a while. I was a landscaper, I did construction, in fact, so don't you ever tell my son this, but I actually skipped school for 3 months in my senior year at high school and did construction. I've been a bus boy, I was a canoe instructor, I was a raft and mountain guide for quite a while actually. I actually ran an employment center for a while. Those were the not physics things that I've done, although the raft guide, it turns out, is something that did impact my career path, because people would regularly ask me, so I knew I wanted to do physics already, so that was separate. But people would ask me about the river and about the turbulence in the river and things like that. And it turns out that did have an impact on me studying turbulence and going into what I went into. So those were the non-physics related things. Physics related things, I was a physics teacher in the Peace Corps, so I taught physics and other things, but physics for a bit over 2 years in secondary school, so equivalent to high school. But a rural high school, so we had electricity for whatever, we had a generator and had electricity for 3 hours or 2.5 hours a day, so that the students could do their homework at night, and that's it. Because it was a boarding school also. And that's where I learned the value of discipline, because our students would get beat by the teachers. I never did, but one time one of our students got caned, and the cane, so they had to go out and get the cane to get themselves caned. And the student got caned, it broke, went flying across the room and hit my leg, and I got a welt on my leg from the cane that had bounced off his butt, broke and hit me, and I was like, holy But at any rate, so I was a teacher, and I know about proper discipline that we should start using here. I was a teaching assistant, and then I was a teaching assistant trainer. I've taught physics teachers also. Then I was a Wigner Fellow and Senior Researcher at Oak Ridge National Lab, and then here, you know me. So the reason I told you this is you really can ask me virtually anything, because I've done most things. So, your path. This is stolen, by the way. So a lot of things that I have on, well, not a lot, but a number of things that I have on here are stolen wholesale from the book that we are going to use next year in the class. It's a book put together by AIP and the SPS called the Career Toolbook. And so what will happen is all the students will get a copy of it and get to keep the copy of it and work through it, and there's worksheets and all kinds of things that are really good. And so this graphic is stolen from them. And these really are, to a large degree, not completely, but to a large degree, the three paths that people take from physics undergraduate degree. Straight ahead, graduate school. It's the one that a lot of people come in saying, well, obviously the thing you do after getting an undergraduate degree in physics is graduate school. And it turns out that about 50% of people do, in fact, take that path. But that means that about 50% of people don't take that path, and they go one of those other two paths. And they're divided, maybe slightly artificially, but for, I think, a good reason, and that is that how you get into them is a bit different. One is the teaching and education path, and that generally are people who aim at teaching in high schools, maybe middle schools. But you can teach elementary school also, and there's nothing wrong with that, that's great, but you're a little overtrained for teaching in elementary school. Some people actually are able to go with a bachelor's degree and perhaps going on and getting a master's of ed into community colleges. And so there are some people who actually can go the community college route. It depends on the college. Some allow people to be hired without a higher degree in physics, some don't. And then something like a third of the people go into workforce. And so that's either STEM or non-STEM, so that means into science fields or non-science and technology fields. Okay? So here are those things we've just said. So this is kind of the STEM, sorry, not the STEM. This is the employment option and not going on to graduate school. So this is the 50% of people who don't go on to graduate school. So engineering, computer hardware and software, research and technical, and then education. All right? There is another group, which I'm going to talk about a little bit later on. I'm not going to actually go through all of these. But there's another group, and that is the non-STEM areas. And I'm going to go and just mention them because they're often things that people don't think about. But I personally have no examples in, I think, every single one of the areas I'm going to mention to you guys. All right, so this is because we're physicists, we like graphs. So AIP is a great place to get information about physics careers, and they have a whole statistics site that has various statistics. And so even though I've shown these to you guys before, you actually haven't seen these because these are new and updated ones. Although they are roughly the same, the numbers are roughly the same as the previous version. So these came out last spring. And so starting on the left-hand side, this top group, so these are the outcomes from the bachelor's in 2013 and 2014. And so the top group is the ones who went on to graduate school. That graduate school does not necessarily mean in physics. So it turns out that graduate school includes graduate school in physics, astronomy, mathematics, computer science, engineering. There's a whole variety of things that people have gone on to. I can't remember the breakdown now. I think it's something like 2/3 go on in physics and astronomy, and 1/3 go on in these other areas. But it's still a not insubstantial fraction that don't go on in physics, but go on in something else. Then the rest, the other roughly half, goes to the workforce, or tries to go to the workforce. 5% of them, when this was done, were unemployed. But that's actually a fairly small fraction of the graduates. Those people, if you take those people and just take this bottom part, so the employed ones, this is how their employment breaks down. About 2/3 of them are in the private sector, and we'll talk about that in a second, a little more in a second. And then the rest are divided up between teaching and then military and labs and colleges and universities. Usually the colleges and universities are things like as research assistants, technicians, lab supervisor, like Beth, our new lab supervisor, would fall in that category. Okay? Of this group that went on to employment in the private sector, this is how that group is broken down, roughly speaking. And so engineering, non-STEM things, which we'll talk about more, but that's like financial and entertainment and law and all kinds of things like that. A fairly low, so engineering and then computer and information sciences are the two largest, actually, individual things. Non-STEM comprises a bunch of things. Then other STEM fields, and then physics or astronomy. And so that is things like working for national labs or working for companies as a physicist. And there's a lot of companies that you can do that, actually, for. All right, last piece of this page is what's a bachelor's degree worth. So this is something that is not aimed at you guys. That statement is aimed at you guys. This is aimed at your parents. So I'm actually not kidding about that fully. Very often we find parents actually try to talk people out of getting a physics degree because they say it's not as bad as saying, oh, I want to get a degree in literature or art, but it's close. But the truth of the matter is that in terms of starting salaries, it's among the highest. So if you take a look at this, most of these are engineering areas in computer science, top is computer science, but physics is actually number 3 on this, okay? And now physics has a wide range, and the wide range is because of these things, that there's a wide range of things that you can do. It turns out that this bottom end here is this piece here. So it turns out that with a bachelor's degree, working at universities is among the lowest paid jobs you can get. The top end of this is actually over here, the computer part, and to some degree the engineering, but mainly the computer information systems part is actually the top end of this. So there's a large range in this, but the middle of it is close to $60,000 a year for a starting salary for someone with a bachelor's in physics. Okay? All right. But like I said, you can use that for your parents. Oops. For you, you should be doing it for the love of physics. All right? Because there's easier ways to make a living. And I've done a lot of them. There's easier ways to make a living than doing physics, but there are very few more enjoyable ways if you love physics. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to step through this. So I'm gonna first talk about the top part. So actually, let me see if I'm wasting time. I already know what you're doing. Do you guys know what you want to do?
Yeah, grad school.
Grad school? Okay, fine, we're gonna go through this. Doesn't matter what you want to do.
Sorry.
It's at least 50% at least 50% want grad school. That's all I need to do. All right.
Yeah, we had to match the graph perfectly.
That's right, exactly. So relatively quickly, I'm going to go through why grad school, and that's going to be not relatively quickly, it's going to be really quickly. Then I am going to talk a little bit on how to choose the right school. And so as Riley can attest to, because I've talked to him about this a fair amount, fundamentally the answer is I can't tell you how to choose the right school, but I can tell you what kind of things you should think about to choose the right school for you, because that's really what matters. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about what you have to do to get in, how to get in, and then I won't actually talk about it. I won't show a slide about it, but I will talk briefly about the application, CV, and statement, and then what to expect in grad school. So that's why. All right? So seriously, don't go to grad school. And I say this really strongly. Don't go to grad school just because in physics because it's something to do. It's a terrible reason to go to grad school. And you know, every year, no, not every year, every couple of years we get someone who applies and we admit to grad school. And the reason they applied, and they were good students, because we admitted them, but the reason they applied was because, well, it was the next logical thing. It's just what they should do. And that's a bad reason also. It really is. I would prefer someone take a year off and, you know, or take some graduate classes or try to work a little bit in a related field to see if this is the passion that you have. Because grad school is not easy. It should be the best time of your life because the classes you take are really challenging. Some of them are downright hard, but you're doing it in a subject that you want to learn. And so you're learning this material that very few people in the world know, and it's how the universe works. And it's like, whoa, that is really cool. But if you don't think that's really cool, don't do it. So there's one class, which is the Graduate Electricity and Magnetism class, and that, you guys have heard me say this, and I say this to all the incoming graduate students, and they don't believe me until they take it, and that is, I think it's the hardest class that universities offer. And seriously, seriously, the homework typically should take something like 30 or 40 hours a week in that class. It usually doesn't because we encourage people to work together, but it's a lot of work, and they're hard problems. When I have taught that class, I will spend more than 10 hours doing the homework. And so that's when I teach the freaking class. When I took the class, it was a lot more than 10 hours. All right. So, choosing the right school. This is where, so I was saying this to Riley 2 days ago or something like that. And that is, you need to figure out what's important to you in terms of choosing the graduate school. So, if you know that you want to go into particle astrophysics, and you just know that you are driven to do particle astrophysics, so your top priority is finding schools that do particle astrophysics. And so your first cut is simply going to be that. If you know you want to work with a person, think again. So the reason I say that is you might say, okay, I want to go to Madison, University of Wisconsin-Madison, because I want to work with Francis Housen on IceCube. So IceCube is this big neutrino experiment that's buried in the South Pole, and Francis is the PI for it. Yeah, but that's a terrible idea. It's a terrible idea not because Francis isn't a good guy, but because you deciding you want to work with him is not the same thing as deciding he wants you to work with him. And so if there's only one person who is possible that you want to work with someplace, find another place. What you really want to do is you want to find a place that has a group of people doing the kind of things that you're interested in, and then you do a bit more research to find out, okay, are these people I would like to work with and things like that. But that's not the only thing. So you have to be happy where you are. You're going to spend it depends if you get a master's or PhD, something up to 7 years in this place, and you want to be happy there. And so the location can be important. Like the physical location. If you hate urban areas, don't go to a school in New York or LA. If you love urban areas, do think about that, and don't think about UAF. You get the idea. These are actually important things. Size. Some people do well in huge departments. Some people prefer smaller departments. Look at those things. And so we're a fairly small department, and therefore we only have a couple of subject areas. So we have a big space physics group, a smaller complex systems group that's not in me, and then a tiny solid state group that's out there. Okay? And so that's the kind of thing that you want to look at. I would not, if someone wanted to do nuclear physics, and we get this every year, we get applications from people who say, well, I'd like to come to graduate school and do nuclear physics. Like, you're interested in us. And this go through their website is important. It's really silly to not have gone through the website and say, I want to study this, and it's something they don't study at all. Culture. So the last thing is something that's remarkably important. There are different cities and different schools have very different cultures. And so these are cultures both from the what you would normally think as the cultural point of view, so things like art and music and food and that kind of thing. And then there is the more subtle culture, the social culture. So there are places that are more conservative, there are places that are more liberal, there's this whole wide range of things. These can be important. They might not be, which is fine, but they might be. And so learning something about the culture of the city is, or university is a worthwhile thing to see if you think you'll feel comfortable. And then, if you can, it's really useful to do what Riley has done to a couple of places, and that is going and actually visiting them. So if you can do it, it's not easy, and the truth is most students don't do this, but it's worth it if you can, because then these last two things are much easier to do if you're actually there, and that is talk to the faculty and talk to others and talk to current graduate students. I don't know what that, oh, more than one. So the more than one is important, and even if you don't go visit, you can do this. You can ask their graduate coordinator to give you phone numbers or emails of a couple of graduate students that you can get in touch with. And you can either email them or call them and talk to them. And find out if they're happy, find out what they're not happy with. The reason I say more than one is a terrible statistic, because you could get someone who hates it, and the reason they hate it is because they just broke up with their boyfriend or girlfriend. Or you can get someone who loves it, but is also not representative, and they love it because they were just given, a huge scholarship or something. And so you really want to talk to a couple, and that's one of the reasons that actually going and having lunch with a bunch of graduate students and getting the temperature of the place is worthwhile. Any questions? All right, how to get in. So you should know, you know this already, you've heard this. You should take a wide range of classes. I think I've said this to all of you, all three of you, and that is, seriously, I put our physics program, our undergraduate physics program, equal to any physics program in the country in terms of its rigor. And so therefore, if you do well in our undergraduate physics program, you will do well in graduate school. That is something that's almost a promise from me. All right, so I'm not saying if you just barely graduate with a degree, but if you do well in our physics program, I virtually guarantee that you'll do well in graduate program anywhere. And I have statistical evidence for this, and that is that all the people who have graduated from us who have done well, who we wrote strong letters of recommendation for, have done really well where they ended up. And so therefore, you can get as good an education here, undergraduate education here, as you can any place in the world. You should take a range of classes. So take as much math, physics, and computer science as you can. The more, the better. And do well. So we understand that you won't always do well. But then what you have to do is you have to be able to explain why you didn't do well. And that's one of the things that's really important in your application statement. So if there are any things that could stand out as red flags, you got to explain it. So that they say, this person recognizes that they didn't do as well as they should have on this, or something happened, and they're telling us why or what happened. And so when it comes time for you to do that, you can talk to me, and you can talk to Renata and other faculty members about how you can finesse certain things. Research. So do research. And as you know, we now have, for people coming in this year, have this requirement, everybody has to do a capstone project. Everyone who came in under previous catalogs don't have to, but we encourage it, and basically what that is you do a research project, and then at the end of your senior year, at the end of one of the years, you give a presentation and write a little paper on it, and then it's just a checkbox that you did this capstone research project. Our capstone research projects are not meant to be busy work projects, they're meant to be actual research projects where you get involved with real research. So the application, CV and statement, I've already told you a lot about that. We're going to talk about the CV. The application statement, so you have to take them seriously. I encourage you not to wait for the last minute to do them. A lot of people do. So what happens is many places do a rolling admissions, meaning if we get really good applicants at the beginning, we will offer them positions at the beginning in the hopes that they say yes to us before they say yes to someone else. And so therefore all the slots can get filled up, and so therefore putting in an application early is a good thing to do, and late is not a good thing to do. Your statement, as I said, should be tailored to the school, so you should have done the research about the school, and you don't have to say, I want to do research in this or with this group, but you can say, I'm particularly interested in research in this area and maybe this area, and make sure that those are two areas that they actually have. I would recommend in general not saying that you want to do research in an area that there's only one person doing research in that area at the university. It won't necessarily get you turned down, but it makes it harder for them to say yes to you. Because what happens is when we get graduate applications, if someone says, oh, I want to do research with David, then I get sent that file, and it's almost binary in the sense that, well, yeah, no, I'm not interested in another student or in this student, and therefore the student gets rejected. What we actually encourage our students to do is come and then learn what people are doing, and so to spend their first year learning the faculty members. Not everyone does this, but that's what we encourage fairly strongly. So the CV we're going to talk more about. So for all three of you, I know you've heard this rightly before, but when you write CVs, there's a tendency to put absolutely everything on them. You know, like all those jobs that I showed. I don't on my CV have that I was a landscaper or sold things in the boiler room or busboy. Those aren't relevant to what I'm doing now, and so they're not on my CV. All right, they're relevant to my life, and they're important parts of my life, but they're not relevant for anyone else to see, and so they're not on there. So same thing. Even though you might be tempted to put absolutely everything down on your CV, don't. And most importantly, even if you do put some of these things on there, you know, for example, you guys are young. You don't have a very large employment history right now, and so you might want to put some of these things. You know, I worked at the Wood Center in outdoor life or something like that. There's nothing wrong with doing that. That shouldn't be any place near the top of things. That should be, you know, other employment down farther. So they know you've had jobs, but you're not saying that's the reason you should hire me or that's the reason that you should let me into grad school. Get others, like faculty members, to read through your statements and your CV. So part of the reason for that is sometimes you'll write something in a way that's completely unclear to anyone else other than you, but it's completely clear to you, and having someone else read it and say, hey, this doesn't make sense, let's change it. The other thing is that faculty members in particular can help you in terms of focusing things and taking extraneous stuff out, which is actually important. And different faculty members, so one is not enough. In this case also, different faculty members have different things that they tend to feel strongly about. Then finding good letters of recommendation, but not finding, but almost finding good letters of recommendation are important. And so good letters of recommendation, it helps very much to get good letters of for getting good letters of recommendation for you to do things like be interactive with faculty members. Be friendly, of course, but be interactive with faculty members. Don't simply sit in the class quietly and not ask questions. Go to faculty members and ask for help on homework. That's not a negative, that's a positive. Get to know the faculty members a little bit. The person you do research with, really do a good job with that person. You don't, so research is a funny thing. We don't know the answer. We don't even always know that we'll be able to get an answer. And so therefore, failing at a particular research project is not a negative necessarily. Failing for not trying is a negative. And so if you show that you try and you work well and you work hard and you interact well with the group, you'll get a good letter of recommendation even if nothing major came out of the research project. All right, and so that is really important. You know, I have this kind of rubric that I use when I'm writing letters of recommendation, and they're things like intellectual ability, works well with others, can do independent research, and then I kind of say something about each of those things. And so those are the things that you want to make sure that the people who you want to have write letters of recommendation can say something about. Okay?
One thing, I was curious what you thought of the importance of versus like taking other classes like getting a second degree in math or computer science versus doing more research and more like extracurricular stuff.
It's a really hard question to answer. It kind of depends what you want to end up doing. I think that going into physics, having computer science under your belt more than just our 220, although 220 is a good beginning, having more than just the 220 is worthwhile, and math. So because we put 301 in, a lot of students feel that they don't have to take any of the math classes any longer. But taking some of those math classes is worthwhile because one of the biggest problems that incoming graduate students have is with math. A number of our students have gone on and done very, very well in the math physics at other places because they've taken a bunch of math classes here. That said, doing research, if it's between doing any research and taking the classes, I would definitely say do the research. Because at this point, having done research is really important. Having done real research and getting a good letter of recommendation from the person you did research with is really important. But the way you phrased it is doing more research versus taking more classes, it's hard to judge. Okay?
Dr. Newman.
Yes?
So I just had a quick question. So would you recommend staying a fifth year and taking more classes in math and computer science or graduating in 4 years instead?
Okay, so this is the answer to this is going to be a very personal answer. I would recommend staying the fifth year. But the reason that's a personal question is it depends on all kinds of other things, financial things and whatnot, as to whether you want to and are able to do that. So I gave the, whatever it's called, invocation to the incoming undergrads 2 years ago or something like that. 3 years ago maybe now. And one of the things I said was actually exactly that. That even though your advisor and your parents and the provost who is sitting next to me would like you to graduate in 4 years, this is your opportunity to actually explore and learn lots and lots of different things. It's the only opportunity you have in your life to do this. You should make use of it. With the caveat that I understand that some people can't, that some people, you know, because of financial constraints or because of family pressure or because of whatever, really want to get out or have to get out in 4 years. And I understand that. So I'm saying if you can, my general advice is get as much into your head as you can. Get as many academic experiences as possible while you're at the university. And so if you are doing it in a way where, and I really do encourage you, take a class in Dostoevsky if you're interested in Dostoevsky. But not just that. Take some more math classes and some more computer science classes and some more physics classes. A number of our students have taken graduate level physics classes, and you know, from us. And even if you have to take it again, wherever you go,
sung, or?
No, I took it from CP Price.
No, graduate one.
Oh, graduate, no.
No, okay.
I took the math physics. Harry and
Amir, that's right. And so, like I said, that's the hardest class that we have. And so I don't know, but they might have to take it again wherever they go. But it'll be a whole heck of a lot easier the second time. And I've got to tell you, for me, teaching it the first time was a very, very perspiration-inducing event. The second and third time I had my notes. I might not have known what my notes said, but I had my notes. So, last thing on there, the GREs. The GREs suck in every way. And we, as a physics department, recognize that particularly the subject GRE is relatively meaningless. A lot of universities don't, like we don't require it right now, the subject one. A lot of universities do still require it. So, one of the things that I actually write in all of my letters of recommendation for grad schools is our students tend not to perform fantastically well in the physics GRE, and that's because we stress problem solving more than we stress in our program. We stress problem solving more than we stress the details. And there's a bunch of physics GRE problems, or actually I don't even know because I haven't taken GRE in a long time, and I've only looked at some of the sample exams a little bit, but like nuclear physics questions on there. Like, I'd get it wrong. Right? I mean, I really would. I would get it wrong. I mean, maybe if I taught nuclear physics just before I took it, then I would get it right, but otherwise I'd get it wrong for sure. Because I don't remember the decay chains for different things, and they expect you to for some of those. Did you take the physics GRE? Mm-hmm. And
I would say, like, start practice as early as you can. Yeah, like order of magnitude, like dimensional analysis, all those estimation techniques, because to me, that's basically all I practiced and did, and to me it felt like if you have that down pretty well, you're pretty much assured at least like up to a fairly decent, like an okay score.
Right. So with the GREs, if you can use order of magnitude and estimation techniques, then what you can do is you can eliminate some of the answers and then you guess. And that's the right thing to do. Okay? All right. What to expect. So for a master's degree, it's typically 2 to 3 years for masters. For a PhD, the national average is about 6.5 years. So I actually strongly oppose any program, really strongly oppose any program that gets students out with a PhD in 5 years or less, because I don't think that you're actually fully baked at that point. And that's actually important. That's actually an important point, that it's not just getting through the material and writing the papers, it's actually learning how to be a scientist. And so that takes, in my view, at least 5 years. I mean, there's some exceptions, but in general, at least 5 years. What you'll do typically is you'll take a couple of years of classes. You'll take something like a comprehensive exam, which is the physics version of hazing. So that's an exam that for us, it's a 4-day-long exam that graduate students take at the end of their second year typically, and it's one exam a day for 4 days, and they have 6 hours each of those days to do the exam, and it's in different topics. So we offer them they have to take them in math, physics, classical mechanics, and E&M, and then the fourth one, depending upon whether our students are getting a space physics PhD or a physics PhD. If it's a physics PhD, the fourth one is quantum mechanics. If it's a space physics PhD, then the fourth one is plasma physics. And so this is not universal. This is us. Almost all departments have something like a comp, but they can be completely different than ours. So those are all over the place. Then you do research. Almost all departments, physics departments, also have you as a TA for a while, so we mandate that all our students do TAing, because in addition to helping the department, that also helps you learn how to teach things. And you don't actually know something until you've taught it. You do teaching, you learn how to write, and
as I was telling our graduate students yesterday, this is the thing that we do a particularly bad job with our graduate students on, because when it comes time to start reading the things they've written, we all collectively yank our hair out in clumps. But you got to do that before you graduate, because you actually have to write a thesis. You make connections, and that's really important for what happens in the future. So you do things like interact with people outside of this department and conferences and things like that. And you make friends that will last for life, hopefully. And, you know, so one of the things is about that friends part. So your relationship with your advisor is like a marriage. I mean, it really is. And to some degree, you should go into it like a marriage, in that you shouldn't simply choose someone based on the fact that, oh, this is a brilliant physicist doing something I'm interested in. Because if your personality doesn't match with theirs, you will have a horrible time, a really, really horrible time. Really horrible time. I was really lucky. My advisor was fantastic. He's one of my best friends now. So he's someone that, so when I first taught Jackson, you know, I called Paul, and I'm like, help, help, what do I do? And so Paul said, I don't remember if he FedExed them to me or what he did. He sent me some of his notes so that I could start with some of his notes. Because I'm like, oh my God, this is hard. It's harder now than it was when I took it. And so he really is. He's one of my best friends. I call him, I talk to him all the time. I was really lucky. There's other people who will not say a positive thing about their advisor. They're like, oh, it's the most horrible experience of my life. And that's terrible. Spending 6 years having the most, that's either a good marriage or a bad marriage. And so you want the good one. And so this is something that you actually want to go into with thought, not willy-nilly. Okay, you know what, I'll
One
yes,
thing,
go ahead.
I don't know if you mention it later, but some of it might just be worth, don't go to grad school unless you're getting paid to do it for physics.
No.
Or,
I don't agree with that.
no.
So I strongly don't agree with that. So you said don't unless you are getting paid for it?
Yeah, like you get a stipend or your tuition
So it
covered.
won't always happen. I mean, we admit people without support. And if you want to go someplace and they say, we'll admit you but without support, don't necessarily say no. Think about it. So nowadays, more and more universities in physics departments, so it used to be what Riley said was true, that just about everyone who went to physics graduate school had support. But nowadays, because of the funding climate, there's a lot less research funding. And so what happens in, like Madison, for example, the way it works in Madison is when they admit someone, they guarantee them support for, I think it's 5 years. And so what they will do is if they don't get research support, they'll give them teaching assistantship support for the whole time. With us, when we admit someone, we give them 1 year support, and we guarantee them 1 year of teaching assistantship support. And after that, we don't guarantee anything. The truth of the matter is that if the student is trying and stays in good standing, we do our very best to make sure they have support. But we've had people who have had to do a variety of other things, like work at the Alaska SAR facility, or do computer stuff. Or we had one person, she didn't actually. And so I think that while what Riley said used to be something that was true, it's a lot less true now, and so you have to actually judge the situation. It is true that most of the time you actually can get support, but not always. Okay? And we tell our students, yes, go ahead.
I was going to say, because can't graduate school tuition without waivers be pretty expensive?
They can.
I
It
know.
depends on the place. So you absolutely do have to look at that. Yeah. So graduate school tuition typically is more expensive than undergraduate school, and so yes, what you just said is right. And so you have to look at the whole situation, but think about
All right, so this is things like employment for after a physics PhD. And yeah, I'm not gonna go through this right now, unless you have any particular questions about it. No, okay. So this is more grad school stuff. So I would actually, let me say one thing about this. So one of the questions that they asked was for people, and we asked our alumni the same question, actually, almost the same question, is, you know, what did you use, or what are the most important things that you use in your job that you learned in grad school? And so at the top for postdocs, so there's two career paths largely for people who end up coming out of grad school, and that is postdoctoral route, which is kind of the university research route in some degree national labs. And then the other one is going into, well, permanent jobs or potentially permanent jobs, often in the private sector. So basic research is the single most important thing for postdoc route, but high up on both of them is technical problem solving. That's what we try to teach you as an undergraduate, but that's one of the most important things that you learn as a graduate student also. And then there's this other range of things, programming, advanced math. This one doesn't have writing. Does it have communications? Maybe not. I thought it did. Ours does. And so there's a variety of things that it's worth looking at this list as you go through graduate school to say, oh, I want to make sure that I actually get these skills because these are the ones that are the most useful. Okay, so physics jobs with an undergraduate degree. So this is now going away from grad school and going into getting jobs afterwards. So we went through this to some degree, but this is in a little bit more detail. So at the top, there's physics, and so people can work in theory, experiment, and computers. And so you can, with an undergraduate degree, you can do those things usually as kind of as technical support. So working as a technician or lab support or something like that, programming support. Then there's applied and fundamental research in physics. And remember, it was a relatively small fraction of people who actually went on and did this. Although there are a fair number, not large, but fair number of people that go on to do applied physics in industry or laboratories. And that can actually be they can do some kind of cool stuff. Then engineering, we talked about engineering a bit. Education, we talked about education. Industry, so those are mostly the STEM things. And the ones after that are the ones that people don't often think about, finance. So, turns out that financial industry hires physicists left and right. And that's not necessarily a good thing. So you know the stock markets, you guys know the stock markets, right? Do you know the derivatives markets? So they're exactly what they sound like, and they were invented by freaking physicists. So the derivatives markets are derivative of the stock market, all right? And so instead of betting on the price of the stocks, you're betting on the rate of change. And so you're betting on the derivative. So derivatives are, as you should all know, much more sensitive than the actual curve. So taking the derivative of a curve makes it more jaggedy, unless it's a straight line. All right? And so therefore derivative markets are wonderful things for gamblers and are very volatile. And they were invented by physicists. So they're all over the place in the finances. And part of the reason is because physicists are trained both in math and in problem solving. Game development. So this is true. I have friends in all of these areas. Game development. Good computer games require good physics. And so you have to know the physics even if you don't want it to be realistic. And so therefore knowing the physics and being able to put good physics engines in requires physicists to do. And so therefore knowing coding and knowing physics, put those two things together and you can become a game developer. Entertainment. So it turns out the same thing that I just said about games is true for entertainment, both in movies and
also in the amusement arena. So, for example, Disney hires physicists as well as engineers for their Imagineering, because when they come up with new rides and new amusement park things, they're no longer rides, they're experiences. And again, knowing the physics is really, really important. I think, I don't know, I don't remember if I said it when you guys were there. I think Riley's heard me say this. So the first conference I went to as a graduate student was in Anaheim. It was one of the American Physical Society conferences in Anaheim. And the day the conference ended, myself and another graduate student went to Disneyland because we were there. And so the two of us, this was so geeky. I mean, this was as geeky as you can imagine. The two of us went around with our mouths hanging open, thinking, oh my God, it would be cool to work here and work on that. We saw these holograms of ghosts or something, I don't know what. And we're like, whoa, this would be so cool to work here and do the physics of this. And so he ended up being an experimental physicist and doing tomographic inversions, which actually are related to holograms. So, okay. All right, so these are some of the areas you can go into as a physicist. Now, how do you find them? And so one of the things, and that, that sounds stupid, but it's not. Because when you're looking through job advertisements, they don't say, oh, physicist in game development, or maybe they do sometimes, but very rarely do they say that. Or say, physicist who wants to do engineering. So what you have to do is you have to start looking for keywords in the job announcements that are things that you actually could fit. And so I'm not going to go through these, but here are some of the keywords that you will find for engineers, for example, and for computer software and hardware development, and for research and technical areas, and for education. So one of the things is that for education in particular, particularly in places like Alaska, where the schools are often smaller, not always, but often smaller schools, they often will not have a job that's only for a physics teacher, but it's actually for either a science teacher or a physics and math teacher. And so looking for job announcements that are saying, oh, we want a physics teacher, may never show up. Instead, looking for something that has physics and math or something like that is the kind of thing that you might want to actually be looking for. Very often, people start in school systems as substitute science teachers, and then you get your foot in the door, and then when an actual job opening comes up, your foot is in the door with that school system, and you can actually go for the full job. Any questions right now? All right, so the process is, and to some degree this is also true with the graduate school, and that is you look for your area of interest, or you look for the things that you're interested in. Then informational interviews. And so I'm going to make the assumption that both of you will take I think we're going to call it Physics 300, that module thing, where we'll actually talk about this in more detail. But informational interviews, this is the opposite of a job interview, and it means you interview them to see if what the job really entails. And so you don't usually do it at the company you're trying to apply for a job with, although you can sometimes. And we will actually try, I don't know if this is going to work, but we're going to actually try to bring some people into this class so that you guys, the students, can actually interact with them and do kind of pseudo informational interviews of them to find out more about some jobs. Then when you've decided this is the area you want, you look for those keywords and find a job that you want to apply for, and you write the cover letter and CV. And they're important. And so I don't know if I told you guys this, but when I was in DC for a meeting, I went to a session on this thing, on the Career Toolbox, and Brad actually had us do one of the exercises, and one of those exercises was write the important keywords that you were going to write in your CV and cover letter for this job. And so all of us were physics faculty members from around the world. And afterwards he said, "Yep, none of you are getting that job." And the reason was because we actually, he claims, we actually left out a word or 2 words or something like that he said were absolutely crucial for the job. And so one of the things that's important is reading through the job description and picking out what those important keywords were. So the keywords that we left out were experience in Python programming. Because it turns out that someplace in this job announcement, they said they did development of their whatever it was that they were doing in Python. And we said, almost all of us said, experience coding or things like that. We didn't tailor it properly. He said, very often in companies, it's not even a human that reads it. It's a computer that reads it. And that computer is told to screen the application for certain keywords. And if you don't have the keywords in the computer puts it in the, well, it's not a circular file anymore, it's a square file. Garbage. And so a person has never gotten a chance to see, oh, this person was really great. So that's actually a really important thing, that tailoring that cover letter and CV to the job description is crucial. Then letters of recommendation. Again, letters of recommendation are really important. You want to make sure you ask the right people for them. So if you think someone might not give you a great letter of recommendation or a good letter of recommendation, don't ask them. All right? You either are asking for trouble or putting them in a really awkward position. Okay? Then the interview, and that's the last thing, which I'm going to kind of skip right now, except to say that it's important to be yourself, but it's also important to be professional. And so the job interview, you have to find the happy medium between being too formal and too informal. You should always dress professionally, but dressing professionally for interviews depends upon what the job is. So for example, if you're applying for a lifeguard position, going in a suit and tie is probably not necessary or even appropriate. On the other hand, if you're applying for the position of the chief financial officer, probably going in a suit and tie is really, really appropriate. So I don't remember if it was last year or the year before. It was at this the whatever centennial meeting or whatever that meeting was called, the SPS quadrennial.
Oh, FISCON?
Yeah, FISCON
Yeah.
meeting. So they actually gave advice about what the students should wear when they were going to the meeting and presenting things. And you guys knew Georgie, right? Okay. So Georgie actually asked in one of the SPS meetings, asked me, well, so they said that women should wear dresses and things like that. I can't remember exactly what the dress code was that they said. And I'm not going to say I completely disagree. I didn't completely agree. They were overly restrictive in what they were suggesting for the dress code. However, there is a range that is considered professional and acceptable. And so when in doubt, ask. I mean, not necessarily ask the company, ask one of us or ask someone else who has worked at the company or something like that. What is the appropriate dress code for going for an interview? Because it actually does matter. Yes.
Couple things. One thing I was gonna say, I can or second that statement about the computers going through the resumes, because I've heard that from several other different people as well. And like one of them was actually, I think this was at AGU, I went to a talk that the guy was like in charge of going through stuff for some, like either AGU or something like that, the careers thing. And he said even like, oftentimes even just having like the word like programming in Python or something like that wouldn't be enough. It's actually having more of the conversational phrase where you'd actually say it is important. I don't remember exactly all, but it was like the phrasing of it.
Yep.
And the other thing I wanted to say, at least from what I've heard, is that there's a big difference between CVs and resumes.
There is, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. Yep, that's exactly right. Anything else? Okay. So I mean, Riley has told you this already, but so Riley was in the weirdest
places in the world last summer, and that is dress codes in Washington are really bizarre. They're really, really bizarre. And so it turns out that, I don't know, you probably did experience this, staffers are like normal human beings, and they don't really like dressing up. However, when their boss is around, they have to dress up. But when the boss is not around, they don't. And so last time I was going around to the various Senate and congressional offices, myself and the people I was with were wearing our jackets and ties and dresses. The females were wearing the dresses, the males were wearing the jackets and ties. And it turns out that all of the Republican congresspeople and senators were on retreat. And so we were better dressed than anyone we met. I mean, than anyone we met, which was really hilarious. Because most of the time, the exact opposite is true. It doesn't matter how well dressed I am, I'm not as well dressed as they are. But it was because their bosses were away, and so it was casual Thursday for them. And in Washington, dress really, really matters, and you know what color tie you're wearing actually matters when you're having meetings with people. Most places in the world, like when I go to a conference and one of my colleagues is wearing a tie, I assume that they are meeting with a congressperson or a CEO or something, because otherwise physicists and ties are kind of oil and water, but not completely. All right, so CVs and cover letters. So this was stolen from a whole variety of sources. So yeah, okay. So first thing, the question that Riley just brought up, and that is there are these two different things, resumes and CVs. All right? And so the CV is the thing that I have that's 80 pages long or 70 pages long or whatever it is. All right? The resume is the thing whose purpose is to actually get you employment. And that one should be short. So you will get differences of opinions. There are some people who say a CV should never be, a resume should never be longer than 1 page. Others say 2 is okay, but 70 would never be okay for a resume. So basically, the CV is as long as it needs to be. The content is area-specific listing of, you, but area-specific. So it's not necessarily saying, okay, and I worked as a cashier at Piggly Wiggly, and then I was a raft guide, and then I drove cabs. It's like, they don't care because that's not area-specific at all. But anything that's relevant should be in there. And so that's what my CV is. So purpose is a detailed background qualification. So you gotta be a little bit careful when National Science Foundation says to me, send your short CV. What they're telling me to do is send a 2-page resume. And they have very specific guidelines for what's allowed to be in it. So for example, I'm only allowed to include the 5 most important papers or most relevant papers. I've got whatever 130 papers that I've written or something like that, and I have to choose the 5 most important papers that are relevant to this particular call for proposals or something like that. And so what you should do is you should summarize your skills and education, but really concisely, not with all the details, to fit in that amount of space, and make it really focused toward the job that you're applying for. So, I have no idea why I put this in here. Because you should know that. Curriculum vitae is Latin for course of one's life. And I guess you can look at my CV and it's the course of my life. All right. So first thing. So seriously, you guys should start one. And on your CV, you should start just putting the various things that you have done that are relevant to what you're planning on doing. You can, at this point, put things that aren't relevant. So just because you put it on your CV doesn't mean it's going to go on the resume. I do a lot of things over the course of the year, and if I don't put them on my CV relatively quickly, I will never put them on my CV. So my CV is actually relatively incomplete because I give lots and lots of talks, and if I don't remember to put them on relatively quickly, I'll never put it on, and usually don't. But it helps you to organize things. It helps you to remember things. It's like your backwards planner, because it says what you have done. That's relatively interesting and important. And it helps you for your future career, like which organizations to join and what's missing and things like that. So for example, being a member of SPS is something that should be on your CV. All right? If you took part in some of the outreach, the SPS outreach things, those should be on your CV. Those are relevant and important. Okay? This assists you in setting goals because you look at it, you look at your CV and you look at what I have said or other people say, these are important things. You look at your CV and say, oh, I'm kind of a little light in this area. I should actually maybe work on that. Faculty members, they can look at their CV and say, I had 2 kind of dry years in terms of publications. I really should work on getting some papers out. And that's the kind of thing that it's useful for. It's also very useful in getting letters of recommendation. The reason it's useful is I almost always ask for a CV. Because even though I know you guys, I don't know all that much about you, and I would really like to know a bit more. And so therefore, saying, could you send me your CV so that I can look at it to help me in putting some details in when I'm writing a letter of recommendation. That's really, really a useful thing. And then, even though if you don't work at a university, it's rare to actually have it required, sometimes people do want your full CV. So the university, we have to turn our full CV in every year because it's the course of our life, and they want it. Sometimes other organizations for annual performance reviews and things like that would like CVs, but generally not so much, fortunately. Okay. So, and we all know the trick to get around that 1 to 2 pages is to make the font size 5. You can fit a lot on 2 pages with font size 5. And there are a few ways to ensure infuriation of the people who are reading it than to make a 5-point font. I know I have read them. Don't underline, make them single-sided, and have at least 1-inch margins all around. You can and should use bold and or caps to have things stand out. You should use page numbers, so if it's 1 page, you don't have to use page numbers. And no graphics is generally the right thing. Same font throughout, though you can vary the sizing and you can do things like make it bold or italic. Full name on every page also, at the top of the page. Okay? So, yes.
I guess, I don't know if you go into it a little more, but I had one interesting thing with the layout that someone had told me at one point that really stood out to me, and that was especially like applying to something like a engineering job or something that isn't specifically like asking for a physicist, and that was to put the education at the very bottom. So that they go through, they see like, oh, you have all these qualifications, this looks good, you look like a good fit for the job, and then they see that, so if you're applying to an engineering job, they don't immediately see you have a physics degree and throw the resume out.
So is this someone who actually was someone that hires physicists?
This was someone, I believe this was at APS March. I can't remember who it was. It was one of the, like maybe the APS, like Courtney, one of her, or maybe, I can't remember who it was.
Crystal?
Or maybe it was Crystal. I don't remember who. It was someone gave a talk on.
So it might have been Crystal. Crystal gives these talks. Okay, that's interesting. So that's actually backwards from what I've heard, but that doesn't mean what I've heard is right. So okay, that's worth thinking about. It would be an unusual order, and the thing I would worry about it is that the unusual order is what would actually catch them. But if it gets them to read farther, maybe that's what you actually want. So that's very interesting.
I think that might have
Okay.
been mainly for places that were, because I think they were talking about, it might have been someone asked a question, or they were talking about like getting jobs in engineering, and a lot of them were like, we just like blanket, we only take engineering majors.
So I mean, one of the important things that you should recognize, and this is true internationally, that while there are some companies that really do say we only take engineering majors, the vast majority of engineering companies that are good engineering companies actually very, very happily take physics majors. And so it's not something that you necessarily have to hide. So I mean, that is an interesting thing, and so I had not heard that before. Okay, so I said this already, did I? Well organized and logical, relevant, necessary, include everything you need, don't mix styles or fonts, and keep it up to date. Okay, and so remember, your resume is going to get contracted from the CV. So that's the executive summary of your CV, essentially. Okay, so that's exactly backwards from what Riley just said for the education part. So in general, this is actually the right order, but I think that the suggestion that Riley got is a point well taken, and I don't know beyond what he said. Yeah.
I think that was specifically for like resumes, where some of the interesting ones I talked to, it was, I think this might be one at AGU, like the format was totally different than I was thinking, but it was less bolded, mainly like they're talking about CVs having kind of this more structure, but the resume was mainly highlighting the specific skills at the very top that you have, and like saying I have, like if the job asks for Python programming in a specific like data analysis, say when I did this, I used Python programming.
Okay, so this actually then becomes an interesting question, and so what I think what Riley's partially saying is the difference between a bulleted style and a prose style, and so there are differences of opinions about whether one should in the resume or CV or resume have anything that's in prose style, or that should be in the cover letter, and so it is absolutely true that a lot of resumes actually have more prose descriptions of your skill set and why you are appropriate for the job in a brief paragraph or a couple of sentences. There are others where it really is just the executive summary of the CV. And so I guess part of this comes down to there isn't any one completely right answer to it, and it does depend upon the organization or area that you're applying to, and what you do is you aim it at them. And so one thing that's worth doing is seeing if you can find, like if you decide to apply for a job, an engineering job, do a Google search for good engineering resumes and take a look at some of them. You can also look for bad engineering resumes, and remember, you can learn as much or more from the bad ones as you can for the good ones. And you'll find that for different areas, they really are different. Okay, so here are some of the things that you often will include. So education, honors and awards, experience, professional experience, meaning relevant experience, publications and presentations, and then things like extracurricular and volunteer activities, and some experience and some of your interests. The interests should be relevant interests. Although the truth is that when I get CVs from prospective graduate students, I actually like it if they tell me a little bit about their other interests, their extracurricular interests. It's not necessary, and you've got to be a bit careful with it. Georgie actually asked me, what about political organizations? And the answer, or political or religious organizations, and generally the answer is nope, leave them completely off. However, other things like people will say, oh, I like playing music, or I like ultimate frisbee, or something like that.
I think that those are interesting things to learn about someone. They're not necessarily important and relevant, and so it's not critical to leave them off or to put them on, but for me, they give me a little bit better feeling for the well-roundedness of the person or something like that. Yes?
So what happens if you have a lot of volunteer time with a religious organization?
You asked a good question. So let's imagine this. Let's imagine that you volunteered with the children's group for your church. You don't have to say it's with the church. You can say volunteered with children's group or for children's group. So in general, putting anything that has political or religious connotations in it is a bad idea. Obviously not because there's anything wrong with it, but because different people will have strong views in varying ways about that. However, saying that you have had experience, doing outreach with kids is a great thing to say. Okay, you get the kind of subtlety there? All right. And so I think I answered Georgie in the following way. I think I said something along the lines of, it's fine to say you did volunteer organizing. Don't say I did volunteer organizing for the political party or something like that. Okay? I mean, in some sense, by doing that, you're automatically alienating half of society. Right? And so it's a bad idea. It doesn't matter what you have said, that way you'll do half of society. Okay. Can't get the school's name correct. Yeah. So okay, you guys have computers, right? Those computers have these things called spell checkers. Use the freaking things. It is absolutely hilarious, but not these days, how many times we get, cover letters, CVs, proposals that have all these spelling errors in them. And it's like, you have a spell checker. I mean, I can't spell, you guys know this, I can't spell to save my life, but that's because there's no freaking spell checker on the blackboard. On my computer, spelling errors do get through with me sometimes, and I am absolutely mortified when I let a spelling error get through, because I am ruthless when I read proposals and papers that I'm refereeing, where there's all these spelling errors. It's like, well, if this person doesn't care enough to fix these, then why the heck should I care enough to read it carefully? And so seriously, spell check, get your school's name right. This is not the University of Alabama in Fairfield, okay? You don't have to say everything that happened. If you graduated with some distinction, you should actually say that you graduated with distinction. Degrees and certifications are what's important, not the time spent. However, oftentimes you will say, and this actually can be very important, say the date of the degree. And the reason for that is, what we often do is when we're looking at these things is we look for gaps. So you were doing something from this time to this time, you were doing something from this time to this time. There's a 2-year period that there was nothing. What were you doing then? So seriously, you should, a month or 2 months or whatever is fine, but a 2-year gap needs to be explained. Honors and awards, so relevant honors and awards are important things. In general, go back to the undergrad, but not before. So that once you've gone, this is the kind of thing that generally happens. You do the most recent part. So an interesting thing happened. So I told you guys that I was a Wigner Fellow at Oak Ridge National Lab. And so a Wigner Fellow is
relatively competitive postdoctoral fellowship, and it's very well paid, like more than a faculty position here. So I was a Victor Fellow, and they gave me the fellowship, and they said, oh yeah, but we're waiting for your undergraduate transcripts. So I'd gone through graduate school, and they were giving me the fellowship. And they got my undergraduate transcripts, and the recruiter for the fellowship called me up, and he was not exactly beside himself. He was a little bit embarrassed. He said, well, you know, your undergraduate grades weren't that good. And I'm like, yeah, I know, Kyle. And he said, I'm afraid we're gonna have to lower your salary. I'm like, yeah, that's okay, don't worry. The truth of the matter is, no one looks, you know, once you've gone to graduate school, it's only graduate school that matters. The undergraduate grades don't matter. Yeah, except for them it did. And so it was kind of interesting. But in general, the point behind that story was, it's the details for your most recent experience are the most important ones. So when you're done with undergraduate, it's the undergraduate career, not your high school career, that matters very much any longer. You can say graduated from West Valley High School in 2016, whatever. But then the details for your undergraduate career are the ones that are important. Once you finish with graduate school, the same thing is true, just one level higher. Professional experience. Okay, we've gone through most of this already. So, research. So when you are listing research, you should list it with the lab or facility that you did it with and the director or your principal investigator, the person you work for, so that it doesn't sound like it's you, that it was your own research that you were doing. You should, for professional experience, only include those things that are relevant to what you're doing, to the area that you're interested in. So extracurricular, so list with the most recent first again. Do not describe in general. So this often is the longest list and shouldn't necessarily be. So on a CV you can have it, on a resume chop it down to things that are relevant. Okay, student organizations, SPS would in general go there. Anything here that I want to particularly highlight? Oh, yeah. So this actually is relatively important. So when you guys join SPS, you automatically get to choose if you want to be an APS member or
any of the AIP.
Any of the AIP organizations. So you guys are probably not SPS members, are you? I mean, I know you're members. It's okay. I mean, I know that you're members of our local chapter, but you're not officially members of SPS. Is that correct?
You would have paid like $24.
That's right.
I'm assuming.
So at some point, it's actually worth doing, because it's if you want to go on in physics, join SPS and choose APS as your organization. If you want to go on in education, join SPS and choose AAPT, which is the American Association of Physics Teachers, which is another AIP member. And it's worth having those professional organizations on your CV. And so it's relatively cheap, and you get Physics Today for free if you join APS. You get Physics Teacher for free if you join AAPT. And I mean, there's a bunch. The American Optical Society is one, and there's oodles of them, actually. Actually, even the American Meteorological Society is an AIP organization. Yes.
So, APS.
Yes.
I'm guessing it stood for Arizona Public Service Company.
That's correct. Yes, because no one worked for them. So I am the chairman of the APS right now, and well, AAPS, DPP, and so it's, what is it? Arizona Public
Service.
No, it's the American Physical Society. Okay, so that was the affiliations. Okay. Research experience, this is important.
So it depends what you're doing. This is important if you're going to graduate school or if you're applying for a job that is research related. This is really important. Make sure if you fall under someone, make sure you fall under someone. So whenever, actually that's wrong. Make sure you fall on top of someone because it hurts much less than if you fall under someone. Make sure, oh I see what that meant. Make sure you fall under someone unless it truly is your lab ownership. So that means make sure you put the lab supervisor's name there so that it's clear that you were working for this person. That's what fall under in this case means. Okay? If you actually had to write anything that was a grant proposal, put it in there. That's really important for everyone. Okay, and so this is the only place on a CV that you actually can make a little description. Publications and presentations, I already said this. Either chronological order or reverse chronological order. In this, you should always bold your name in the publications so that people who are actually an author of all publications you have. You may include pending or submitted publications, also just you say submitted or pending. Presentations can be large presentations or small presentations, but shouldn't be every time you've talked to anyone. So like when you gave a talk to your communications class, don't put that on your CV. You can say have had experience in communications if it's relevant to the job, that you can say have taken a class in communications or something like that. That's perfectly legitimate. But if you gave 4 presentations to your communications class on, why the Lincoln-Douglas debate turned out the way it did, you don't really have to put those down. Yes?
I remember someone mentioned this. I can't remember what you said before. Something like the advanced lab, the final, would that be?
So I actually think that is relevant, that you can put that down. So don't, because that one is it is professional presentation. So that's us trying to get you to be able to do professional presentations. And yes, you can say, did a public presentation, because it is public presentation on whatever you chose, the Compton scattering or milk and oil drop experiment or something. As part of a course. Yeah. Yes. Oh no. Okay. All right. So, and it says for the life of your CV, so you can keep adding to that. That's why mine is as long as it is. Okay, let's skip this. Well, actually, let's not skip this. So now this is very, very job specific. If you're applying for a job in Japan, then putting something about cultural knowledge is absolutely appropriate, and even cultural experience. So this is the kind of thing that can or may not be added depending upon exactly what the job is. And so languages can be important in certain circumstances and can be completely unimportant in other circumstances, so judge what it is you're applying for. Cultural knowledge, similarly. So interests are hobbies, list 4 of them. Yeah, that's a very rigid number. It depends how much room you have. Listing none is okay also in those things, depending on the room. All right. So if you are listing these, get something active, get something group. And so the reason is that people want you to be well-rounded. And so they don't want you to put down as your hobbies playing Mortal Kombat, watching Star Trek. I can't think of 2 more. But 4 things that are geeky, passive things, right? Even if those are the only 4 things that you do, get something group-wise, like say play interactive games, massive online gaming. So that's a group word. What were the things called? The Wheeze?
Fits?
Yeah. What those things where you stand up and like, yeah, you can say play massive online Wii games, so it's active ed group. Probably not. Okay, list of references. So typically, this is separate from the CV and resume, unless they specifically say otherwise, and that is you have a list of references and have the contact information for them. Important point. Always talk to the people that you are using as a reference and say, is it okay if I use you as a reference? That's really, really important. And even if they said yes, every time you use them, tell them, so that they know, oh, you'll be getting something in the mail or email or something like that. Like Riley had to remind me regularly, because I would get these things saying, write a letter of recommendation for him. I'm like, yeah, okay, I will. And then I'd forget 12 minutes later, and so Riley said, have you done that yet? Oh yeah, I did it. Either hours ago or hours from now. Okay, yeah, okay, that's it. Okay, so, I'm calling it quits here. So do you guys have any, so what we're gonna do in the class is we're actually going to practice what we preached. And so we will go through actually making a CV, resume, and cover letters, and do all kinds of things.